Kenzo was 37 years old, a junior partner at Cravath, Swain & Moore, earning a base salary of $520,000 a year, and he had just been rendered completely silent by a single sentence. The sentence had come from his wife, Ellery, and it was delivered across the polished mahogany surface of her parents' Upper East Side dining table. The table, a 14-foot monstrosity that cost her father, Prestige, a rumored $35,000 20 years ago, was laden with the remains of a Thanksgiving feast. The turkey carcass, once a proud 24-pound organic bird from a farm upstate that cost Kenzo $220, was now a skeletal wreck. The crystal glasses, part of a $12,000 Waterford set, were half empty with a French Burgundy that Kenzo had supplied, a 2015 Domaine de la Romanée Conti Richebourg Grand Cru, a case of which had set him back more than a new Honda Civic at nearly $38,000. The conversation had turned, as it often did in this apartment on Park Avenue, to the topic of money and status. Prestige, a man whose name was a cruel joke of his own parents' ambition, was holding court. He was a retired investment banker from a second-tier firm, a man who lived off a portfolio that was respectable, but nowhere near the stratosphere he pretended to occupy. He was pontificating about a recent merger he'd read about in the Wall Street Journal, getting most of the details wrong. Kenzo, trying to be a good son-in-law, offered a gentle correction. Actually, Prestige, the deal structure was a bit different. The acquiring firm used a leveraged buyout model, not a simple stock swap. It was quite a brilliant move by their legal team. Prestige waved a dismissive hand, the large gold signet ring on his pinky catching the light of the $8,000 chandelier above them. Details, details. The point is, big money was moving. That's the world we live in, the world we understand. The "we" hung in the air, a clear and intentional exclusion of Kenzo. Ellery, seeing her husband's quiet professional correction as some kind of social slight against her father, laughed a brittle, unpleasant sound. She reached for her wine glass, her fingers adorned with the 4-carat diamond engagement ring Kenzo had spent $95,000 on 3 years prior. Oh, Kenzo, always the technician. Don't mind him, Daddy. He gets lost in the weeds. Vivian, her mother, a woman who maintained her youth through a series of expensive procedures that totaled an estimated $30,000 a year, chimed in. Well, that's what you hire lawyers for, isn't it? To handle the tedious parts. The insult was layered, dismissing his entire profession, the very profession that funded their extravagant lifestyles, as mere janitorial work for the real players, like Prestige. Kenzo felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the feeling he got every time he sat at this table. He had grown up in a small, loving home in Queens, the son of a transit worker and a school teacher. His deep, brown skin, a shade his own mother used to say glowed like polished mahogany, was always a stark contrast in this room, filled with people who saw his background as a deficit he was lucky they overlooked. His neatly groomed locks, which he'd worn since law school, were a point of silent contention. Vivian had once offered him the card of a barber who could give him a more corporate look. He chose to let the comment slide. He was tired. It was a holiday. He just wanted to get through the dessert and go home to his own space, a $4-5 million West Village townhouse he had bought with his bonus the year he made partner, a space they rarely spent time in because Ellery preferred the UES apartment he rented for her at $12,000 a month just 6 blocks from her parents. But Ellery wasn't done. She turned to her mother, a smirk playing on her lips. She gestured toward Kenzo with her wine glass, a careless, flicking motion. Honestly, it's fine. If he gets too lost in the weeds, it's not like he's hard to replace. The words landed in the center of the table with the force of a physical blow. For a moment, there was a vacuum of sound. Kenzo looked at her, his mind struggling to process the casual cruelty, the sheer public disdain. He wasn't a person to her. He was a component, a replaceable part in the machinery of her lifestyle. Then came the sound that shattered something deep inside him. Prestige and Vivian laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, it was a full, hearty laugh of agreement. Prestige slapped the table, the silverware rattling. "That's my girl, sharp as a tack." Kenzo's world went still. The ambient noise of Park Avenue traffic outside the double-paned windows faded away. The scent of cinnamon and pumpkin from the kitchen disappeared. All he could see were the three of them. A united front of derision, their faces gleaming with satisfaction. He looked at Ellery, the woman he had married, the woman for whom he worked 80-hour weeks at one of the most demanding law firms on the planet. Her expression was triumphant. She had scored a point in their endless, unspoken game. He had no idea how wrong he was about who was winning. He felt nothing. The rage he should have felt was absent, replaced by a profound and terrifying clarity. It was the same cold, analytical focus he brought to a hostile takeover negotiation. The problem had been identified. The emotional response was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the strategy for resolution. He picked up his fork and took a bite of the now cold, sweet potato casserole on his plate. He said nothing. And in his silence, a decision was made. A decision that would cost them everything they thought they had. Have you ever had a moment where a single sentence changed everything you thought you knew? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice and new beginnings. The facade of their marriage had been built on a foundation of expensive transactions, each one a brick in the wall that separated Kenzo's reality from Ellery's expectations. Their life wasn't a partnership, it was a sponsorship. He was the sponsor, she was the brand ambassador, and her parents were the board of directors, constantly reviewing his performance. Looking back, the signs were not just there. They were giant, illuminated billboards on a highway he had been driving down at 100 miles an hour. Just a year into their marriage, they had gone to dinner at Masa, the notoriously exclusive sushi restaurant in the Time Warner Center. The bill, for 3 people, Ellery had insisted her mother Vivian join them, came to $2,850 before the tip. Kenzo had paid with his black Amex without flinching, but the cost registered. It was more than his own mother's monthly mortgage payment. As they were leaving, Vivian had squeezed his arm. "This is lovely, Kenzo," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's so wonderful that you're able to experience these things now." The implication was clear. He was a tourist in a world they inhabited by right. Ellery had simply nodded, her attention on a $15,000 Hermes Birkin bag a woman was carrying nearby. "I need a new one for spring," she'd murmured, not to anyone in particular, but as a general announcement to the universe, or more specifically, to Kenzo's wallet. The next week, she'd found the perfect one, a Kelly bag in a robin's egg blue, for a staggering $22,000. When he gently suggested they discuss such a large purchase, she had looked at him with genuine confusion. "Discuss? Kenzo, it's a classic. It's an investment. This is what people like us do." The phrase "people like us" was a common refrain. It was a club to which Kenzo provided the dues, but was never granted full membership. Their circle was composed of people like Ellery, the children of wealthy parents, individuals who had never held a real job, whose primary occupation was the curation of their own lifestyle. They talked about art auctions at Sotheby's, summering in the Hamptons at rentals that cost $100,000 for the season, and the trouble with finding good help. Kenzo's work was a source of both their funding and their scorn. He was a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, a shark in a world of sharks. He dismantled companies, saved others, and navigated billion-dollar deals. His mind was his greatest asset. At Cravath, he was respected for his sharp intellect and his almost supernatural calm under pressure. He was one of the few black partners at the firm, a fact he was proud of but rarely spoke about. He'd gotten there through relentless hard work, graduating top of his class at Harvard Law after putting himself through Columbia for undergrad. He'd had no legacy, no family connections, just a brilliant mind and a work ethic forged in a home where every dollar was earned and accounted for. To Ellery and her family, his work was an abstraction. It was the invisible engine that produced the numbers in the bank account. They had no concept of the sacrifice it required. The all-nighters, the canceled vacations, the immense pressure. Once, he had to cancel their anniversary dinner, a reservation at Daniel he had booked 6 months in advance, because a multi-billion-dollar deal was on the verge of collapsing. He'd called her, apologetic, explaining the situation from his office at 9 p.m. Her response was not understanding. It was fury. "Again, Kenzo? This is our anniversary. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I was supposed to meet the Vanderbilt's daughter for a drink beforehand. What am I supposed to tell her? There was no, 'Are you okay?' or 'That sounds stressful.' There was only her own social inconvenience. He ended up sending a courier with a $15,000 Cartier love bracelet to the apartment to appease her, a gesture that felt less like a gift and more like a fine. The most telling event, the one he should have recognized as the final blaring alarm, was the signing of the prenuptial agreement. Kenzo, a man who structured complex corporate agreements for a living, was not about to get married without one. His assets were already substantial: his West Village townhouse, a stock portfolio worth over $1.5 million, and his future earnings as a partner at Cravath. The firm's own counsel had advised him it was non-negotiable. He had presented the idea to Ellery gently, framing it as a standard practice for people in their financial position. She had recoiled, as if he'd slapped her. She ran to her parents, and the ensuing meeting in Prestige's study was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. "A prenup?" Prestige had boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "In this family, we believe in trust. This is an insult to my daughter. It's an insult to me." Vivian had clutched her pearls, a genuine strand that had cost Kenzo $18,000 as a welcome to the family gift. "It's disgusting, Kenzo. It's as if you're planning for failure. You're treating our Ellery like one of your corporate takeovers." Kenzo had remained calm. He explained the nature of his partnership at the firm, the legal complexities, the need to protect assets that were tied to his professional standing. He was a black man in a world where he had to be twice as good to get half as far, and he would not risk everything he had built on a foundation of sentimentality. It was Ellery who surprised him. After a week of dramatic tears and slammed doors, she had come to him. She had spoken to her own lawyer, a high-priced attorney from a firm her father recommended. "My lawyer," she'd said, her voice cool and pragmatic, "told me it's completely ironclad and standard. He said fighting it would be a waste of money, and that I should just sign it." She'd smiled then, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So let's just sign the silly thing and get on with the wedding. I've already put a deposit on the ballroom at the Pierre, a non-refundable $50,000 deposit, Kenzo." And so she signed. He remembered the moment clearly. They were in his lawyer's office, a sleek, minimalist space on the 58th floor of the Cravath building. She had used a $900 Mont Blanc pen he had given her for her birthday to sign her name on the document, a document that explicitly stated that in the event of a divorce, all premarital assets would remain his, that any appreciation of those assets would remain his, and that she would waive any right to spousal support if the marriage lasted less than 5 years. It also contained a fee-shifting clause. If she were to contest the prenup unsuccessfully, she would be responsible for all of his legal fees. Her own attorney, a man billing at $100 an hour, had initialed every page. At the time, Kenzo had felt a sense of relief. He had seen her signature not as a lack of faith, but as a concession to practicality, a sign that she was willing to meet him in the world of logic. He now understood the truth. She and her lawyer had made a calculation. They had weighed the cost of fighting the prenup against the potential gains of 3 to 4 years of a lavish, fully funded lifestyle. They had gambled that the marriage would last long enough to make the prenup irrelevant, or that he would be too besotted or too tired to ever enforce it. They had looked at the agreement and seen it not as a shield for him, but as a temporary inconvenience for her, a cost of doing business. All these memories, these dollar-tagged moments of clarity, swirled in his mind as he sat at the Thanksgiving table. Each condescending comment, each extravagant demand, each dismissive laugh was a piece of evidence. He was a lawyer, and he was building a case in his head. The charge was not infidelity. It was something far worse in his eyes. It was a fundamental and absolute lack of respect. It was the reduction of his entire being, his hard work, his intellect, his love, his very identity, to a single, fungible asset. An ATM that could be swapped out for a newer model if it became inconvenient. He's not hard to replace. The phrase echoed in the silent courtroom of his mind. He looked at the three of them, still chuckling. They saw him as a stepping stone, a means to an end. They had no idea that he was the solid ground, and they were the ones standing on a trap door. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the $3,000 a bottle wine he had paid for. It tasted like ashes. The warmth in his chest had been replaced by a core of ice. It was time to go home. Not to the empty UES apartment he rented for her, but to his home, the West Village townhouse, the place where his real life was about to begin. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. Vivian, oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath her son-in-law's calm exterior, brought out the dessert. It was a pumpkin cheesecake from a bakery on Madison Avenue that charged $95 for the privilege. She served it on delicate bone china plates, part of a $6,000 set that Ellery had registered for their wedding and Kenzo had duly purchased. "Kenzo, dear, you must have a slice." "It's divine," Vivian chirped, sliding a plate in front of him. He looked down at the perfect triangle of orange and white, the graham cracker crust, a precise architectural line. He picked up his dessert fork, a heavy piece of silver from a Georg Jensen collection that cost $4,000 for a service for 8. He cut a small piece of the cheesecake and brought it to his mouth. He registered the texture, creamy, smooth. He registered the taste, cinnamon, nutmeg, a hint of ginger. He felt none of it. It was data, not sensation. Across the table, the conversation had already moved on. Ellery was showing her mother a picture on her iPhone 14 Pro, a device Kenzo's monthly payment plan covered, of a ski chalet in Aspen they should rent for New Year's. "It's only $80,000 for the week, and it has a private chef," Ellery said, her voice casual. "We should invite the Montgomerys. Their son just got a job at Goldman." "Oh, that's wonderful," Vivian exclaimed. "Is he single?" Prestige leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Goldman, you say? Good firm. Solid." Kenzo ate his cheesecake. Bite after methodical bite. He listened to them plan a future that he was no longer a part of. They were discussing the allocation of his money, his resources, without any reference to him. He was not a person at the table. He was a silent benefactor, a spectral presence whose only function was to provide. The phrase, "he's not hard to replace," wasn't just an insult, it was their operating philosophy. He was a line item on a budget, and they were already looking at upgrades. He finished his slice of cheesecake, wiped his mouth with the heavy linen napkin, and placed his fork and knife neatly together on the plate. He took a final sip of water from the Waterford crystal goblet. The ice clinked softly. The sound was like a gavel falling in his mind. Court adjourned. "Thank you for dinner, Vivian, Prestige," he said, his voice even and steady. It was the voice he used with opposing counsel, a voice devoid of emotion, a tool of precision. It was a wonderful meal, Vivian beamed. Of course, dear. We're so glad you could come. Ellery finally looked at him, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Are you leaving already? I wanted to stop by the new Loro Piana store on the way home. They have a vicuña coat I want to look at. A vicuña coat from Loro Piana could cost upwards of $25,000. I'm tired, Kenzo said simply. I have an early start tomorrow. This was not a lie. Ugh, always work, she sighed, rolling her eyes. But she stood up, grabbing her purse, a $6,500 Bottega Veneta clutch. She kissed her parents on the cheek. I'll call you tomorrow to talk about Aspen. The elevator ride down from their 12th floor apartment was silent. The elevator itself was an old, wood-paneled affair with a uniformed operator, a relic of a bygone era of New York luxury. Kenzo stared at his reflection in the polished brass. He saw a tall, well-dressed black man in a custom-tailored $4,000 Tom Ford suit. He saw the fatigue in his eyes, but underneath it, a new, hard light. He looked like a man who had made a decision. Ellery was scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious. As they stepped out onto the cold, wind-swept pavement of Park Avenue, the doorman, a man named Hector to whom Kenzo always gave a generous $500 tip at Christmas, hailed them a cab. Good evening, Mr. Kenzo, Mrs. Ellery, Hector said with a respectful nod. Good evening, Hector, Kenzo replied, pressing a crisp $50 bill into his hand. Happy Thanksgiving. Ellery didn't even look up from her phone. In the cab, heading west, and then south toward the village, she finally spoke. You were quiet tonight. Just thinking, he said, looking out the window at the blurred lights of the city. Don't be so sensitive about what I said, she continued, misinterpreting his silence as hurt feelings. It was just a joke. Daddy and Mummy thought it was funny. I know, he said. And he did. That was the entire point. It wasn't an apology. It was a justification. Anyway, about that coat, she began, but Kenzo held up a hand. Not tonight, Ellery. I'm really not in the mood. She huffed, a sound of pure petulance. Fine. She put in her AirPods, a clear signal that the conversation was over. For the rest of the 20-minute ride, she was silent, lost in whatever world existed on her screen. When they arrived at the townhouse on West 11th Street, he paid the $45 fare and they got out. The house was a beautiful 4-story brownstone he had painstakingly renovated, preserving the original 19th century details while creating a modern, warm interior. It had a small garden in the back, a rare luxury in Manhattan. It was his sanctuary. He had thought it would be theirs. Inside, she immediately kicked off her $1,200 Manolo Blahnik heels in the middle of the hallway and headed for the stairs. I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a bath. Good night, Ellery, he said to her, retreating back. She didn't answer. He stood alone in the foyer. The silence of the house, a stark contrast to the noise of her parents' apartment. He looked around at the art on the walls, a piece by Kehinde Wiley he had bought for $150,000, a sculpture by Simone Lee. These were not just decorations, they were pieces that spoke to him, that reflected his identity and his journey. Ellery had always called them a little too ethnic for her taste. He walked into his home office on the ground floor. It was his favorite room, lined with dark walnut bookshelves filled with first-edition novels and legal texts. His desk was a massive, clean slab of wood. He sat down in his $3,500 Herman Miller chair and turned on his computer. The screen illuminated his face, his expression unreadable. He didn't search for divorce lawyers. He didn't need to. He worked at a firm that housed some of the most feared and respected litigators in the world. He opened his secure Cravath email and typed a new message. The recipient was Sarah Jenkins. She was a senior partner in the firm's trusts and estates department, but she had started her career as a bulldog in family law and still handled high-net-worth divorces for the firm's most important clients and partners. She was brilliant, discreet, and utterly ruthless in a courtroom. The subject line was simple: privileged and confidential. Contract review. The body of the email was even simpler. Sarah, hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I have a personal contract I need you to review at your earliest convenience. It's time sensitive. I'll forward the document separately. Please let me know when you might have a moment to discuss. Best, Kenzo. He attached the PDF of the fully executed prenuptial agreement. He hit send at 11:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. The first step had been taken. There was no going back. He felt no regret. He felt no sadness. He felt only the calm, steady hum of a complex machine being set into motion. The period between Thanksgiving night and the following Monday was an exercise in strategic restraint, a performance of normalcy that required every ounce of Kenzo's considerable self-control. He was living inside a lie, moving through the shared spaces of his life with a woman who was, for all intents and purposes, already his past. Each interaction was a scene, each word a carefully chosen line in a script only he was reading. On Friday morning, he woke up at 5 a.m., his usual time. The sky outside the large bedroom window of the townhouse was a dark, inky black. Ellery was still asleep, a faint line of irritation on her face even in slumber. He slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound on the wide plank oak floors. He dressed not in his usual running gear, but in a pair of gray sweatpants and a hoodie. He went downstairs to his office, the room where he'd sent the email hours before. There was already a reply from Sarah Jenkins, time-stamped 1:12 a.m. Sarah was like him, a creature of the firm. Sleep was a suggestion, not a requirement. Kenzo, document received. I've reviewed it. It's a fortress. Call me anytime this weekend. My cell is number. We'll handle this. He stared at the words, "It's a fortress." A wave of grim satisfaction washed over him. He had built it, and he had been right to do so. He spent the next 2 hours on his computer, not doing Cravath work, but his own. He compiled a spreadsheet. In one column, he listed every major expense he had paid for Larry since their wedding. The $12,000 monthly rent for the UES apartment, the $2,800 monthly lease on her white BMW X3, the American Express Centurion card with no official limit that he paid off every month, averaging $30,000. He added the jewelry, the bags, the clothes, the vacations. The total, after just under 3 years of marriage, was a staggering $1.7 million. He labeled the file expenditures. It was evidence. When Ellery came downstairs around 10:30 a.m., wrapped in a $200 fret cashmere robe he'd bought her for Christmas last year, he was in the kitchen, making coffee. "You're up early," she said, her voice thick with sleep. She didn't ask what he was working on. She never did. "Just catching up on a few things," he said, handing her a mug. "Coffee? Is it that new Ethiopian blend? The one from that place in Brooklyn?" she asked, sniffing it suspiciously. "Yes," he said. "The coffee cost $45 a pound." "It's a little bitter," she said, making a face. She poured most of it down the sink and opened the $4,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator to get a bottle of Evian. The rest of Friday passed in a similar vein. She talked about Black Friday sales, scrolling through Net-a-Porter on her iPad. She asked him if he thought a $3,500 Moncler jacket was too basic. He gave non-committal answers, his mind elsewhere, planning the logistics of the coming storm. Every casual question she asked felt loaded with a dramatic irony that was almost physically painful. "Should I book the Aspen Chalet?" she asked at one point. "Let's hold off for a day or two," he said calmly. "I want to check my calendar." On Saturday, the weather turned, a cold, persistent rain beginning to fall over the city. It matched his mood perfectly. He suggested a walk. In this weather, Are you insane? Ellery said from the couch, where she was watching a reality show about wealthy housewives in Atlanta. My hair will be ruined. Her hair, which was naturally a beautiful tight coil, was currently straightened into a sheet of glass via a bi-weekly keratin treatment that cost $400 a session, paid for by him. I need some air, he said. He put on a waterproof jacket and left. He walked for hours, heading west to the Hudson River Park. The rain was cold on his face, a welcome, cleansing feeling. He stood looking out at the gray, churning water of the river, the Statue of Liberty barely visible in the mist. He felt a profound sense of isolation, but also of liberation. He was cutting the final anchor to a life that was not his own. His phone rang. It was Sarah Jenkins. Kenzo, got a minute? Her voice was brisk, all business. I do, he said, turning his back to the wind. Okay, here's the plan. My team will have the petition for dissolution drafted by Sunday night. It will cite irreconcilable differences. We will simultaneously file a motion to enforce the prenuptial agreement in its entirety. We'll also file for an immediate order confirming your separate property and terminating any temporary spousal support, as per the waiver she signed. The fee-shifting clause is prominent in our initial filing. It puts them on notice immediately. Good, Kenzo said. I need you to do a few things. First, open a new bank account at a different bank solely in your name. On Monday morning, before she is served, I want you to transfer all significant liquid assets from any joint accounts into that new account. The prenup gives you the right to do this upon filing. Leave a few thousand in the old account. Second, have you arranged for service? Not yet. We'll handle it. We use the best process servers in the city. They're discreet but relentless. We'll have someone at her door at 9 a.m. Monday. Do you know her schedule? She'll be at the UES apartment. She has a personal training session there at 10, Kenzo said. Perfect, Sarah said. She'll be served before the trainer arrives. Finally, Kenzo, are you sure about this? Once this train leaves the station, it doesn't stop. He thought of the laughter. He thought of the phrase, he's not hard to replace. I'm sure, Sarah, he said. I've never been more sure of anything. All right, then. I'll be in touch Sunday. Try to get some rest. He hung up and stared at the river. He felt a strange sense of peace. The path forward was clear, a straight, clean line through the mess his life had become. Sunday was the final act of the charade. He told Ellery he needed to go into the office to prepare for a major week ahead. This was a lie she readily accepted. His work was a convenient excuse for his absence that she had long ago stopped questioning. Okay, she said, barely looking up from her laptop. While you're out, can you swing by Citarella? We need more of that fancy Italian olive oil, and make sure the Amex is paid. It's showing a balance. Her tone was that of a person reminding their assistant of a pending task. I'll take care of it, he said. He packed a single leather duffel bag, a $2,500 piece from Brunello Cucinelli, with a few suits, shirts, his laptop, and a hard copy of the prenup. He walked out of the West Village townhouse, the home he had fought so hard for, and took a cab to Worldwide Plaza. The Cravath offices were quiet on a Sunday, but never empty. The lights were on, and a few dedicated associates were scattered throughout the floors, billing hours on a weekend. He went to his corner office on the 48th floor. The view was breathtaking, stretching from the Hudson River to the skyscrapers of Midtown. The glass tower was a symbol of his achievement, but today it felt like a war room. He spent the next 8 hours on a secure video conference with Sarah Jenkins and 2 of her top associates. They went through the petition line by line. They drafted the affidavits. They compiled the evidence, the spreadsheet of expenditures, copies of the apartment lease in his name, the car lease, years of credit card statements. They were building an unassailable case. It was methodical, unemotional, and devastatingly precise. At 8 p.m., the final documents were ready. Sarah's face was grim on the screen. "It's done, Kenzo. All I have to do is press a button tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. when the court's e-filing system opens." "Thank you, Sarah," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This is the easy part. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He didn't sleep in a hotel. He slept on the small couch in his office. He was a man who owned a $4-5 million townhouse, yet he was sleeping in his office like a first-year associate. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was home. He was back in his own skin, in his own world, a world of logic, consequences, and action, a world where he was anything but replaceable. Monday morning broke over Manhattan, the sky a crisp, cloudless blue. The rain had passed, leaving the city washed clean. For Kenzo, it felt like the dawn of a new era. He had been awake since 4:30 a.m., watching the city slowly come to life from his office window on the 48th floor. He had showered in the firm's luxurious gym and was dressed in one of his most formidable suits, a dark charcoal Brioni, a quiet statement of power that had cost him $7,000. His locks were neatly tied back, his face a mask of calm composure. He was ready. At precisely 8 a.m., his phone buzzed with an email from Sarah Jenkins. The subject was a single word: filed. Attached was the court-stamped petition for dissolution of marriage, index number and all. The train had left the station. At 8:01 a.m., Kenzo executed the next step of the plan. He logged into his personal banking portal. He had opened a new private client account with J.P. Morgan Chase on Saturday afternoon. Now he initiated a wire transfer. He moved $582,450 from the joint checking account he shared with Larry into his new individual account. He left exactly $5,000 behind, enough to cover any outstanding automatic payments for a day or two before they were rejected. This action, explicitly permitted by paragraph 12b of the prenup upon a filing for dissolution, was the first real-world consequence. The financial umbilical cord had been severed. At 8:30 a.m., he called the American Express Centurion customer service line. He identified himself, provided his security information, and instructed the representative to cancel the supplementary card ending in 8008, Ellery's card. He also instructed them to lower the credit limit on his primary card to $10,000, a fraction of its former, near-limitless boundary. The representative, professional, and discreet, confirmed the changes would be effective immediately. The next hour was the longest of Kenzo's life. He sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, but not reading. He was waiting. He pictured the scene. The process server, a retired NYPD detective Sarah's firm kept on retainer for difficult serves, making his way up to the UES apartment. He imagined Ellery, likely in her cashmere robe, sipping her Evian, planning her day of personal training and shopping. At 9:18 a.m., his personal cell phone, a number only a few people had, lit up. It was Ellery. He let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text message appeared. "Kenzo, some strange man is at the door with a letter for me. Are you sending me something?" He didn't reply. He imagined the moment the man identified himself as a process server, the moment the thick manila envelope was placed in her hand. The confusion turning to disbelief as she saw the words Supreme Court of the State of New York and petition for dissolution of marriage. His phone rang again. Ellery. He ignored it. And again. Ignored. Then the texts began to flood in. A real-time chronicle of her world collapsing. 9:21 a.m. What is this? A joke? 9:22 a.m. Kenzo, call me this instant. This isn't funny. 9:24 a.m. Divorce? Are you out of your mind? My father will kill you. His office phone rang. The screen displayed the name Prestige St. John. Kenzo looked at the phone, then back at his screen. He let it ring. 4 rings, then silence. The voicemails began to pile up. First from Ellery, her voice a frantic, high-pitched screech. "Kenzo, pick up the phone. What is the meaning of this? You can't do this. After everything we've been through, I'm calling my father." Then, a voicemail from Prestige. His voice was not frantic. It was a low, dangerous growl. "Kenzo, you have made a grave mistake. You have 5 minutes to call me and retract this nonsense, or I will personally dismantle your career. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Kenzo felt a flicker of something, not fear, but a cold, analytical curiosity. Prestige's threats were those of a man used to bullying his way through life, a man who believed his own hype. He had no idea what it meant to go up against the institutional power of a firm like Cravath, especially when the firm was protecting one of its own. At 9:45 a.m., Sarah Jenkins's assistant patched through a call. "Mr. Kenzo, a Mr. Arthur Finch is on the line for Ms. Jenkins. He says he represents Prestige and Ellery St. John. Ms. Jenkins asked if you'd like to listen in." Arthur Finch was the family lawyer. Prestige kept on a country club retainer. A corporate lawyer by trade, he dabbled in divorces for his wealthy friends. "Of course," Kenzo said. He clicked the button to join the conference call, his microphone on mute. He heard Sarah's calm, cool voice. "Arthur, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't play coy, Sarah," Finch's voice blustered. "You know exactly why I'm calling. This petition is an outrage, an ambush. We will be fighting this at every turn. We'll be filing for temporary spousal support, exclusive use of the marital residence." Sarah cut him off, her voice like a shard of ice. "Arthur, let me save you some time and your client some money, though I suspect that's not your primary concern. Have you seen the prenuptial agreement your client, Ellery St. John, signed on October 12th, 3 years ago?" There was a brief pause. "I'm having it pulled now," Finch said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Let me refresh your memory," Sarah continued, her tone relentless. "It was reviewed by your own office. Your predecessor, Mr. Gable, initialed every single page. It contains a full waiver of spousal support for a marriage of this duration. It contains a strict definition of separate versus marital property, and the West Village townhouse falls squarely in the former category. Furthermore, the UES apartment is a rental, and the lease is in my client's name alone. He has chosen not to renew it. And most importantly, Arthur, please direct your attention to page 14, paragraph 22, the fee-shifting provision. Every dollar my client spends defending this ironclad agreement against a frivolous challenge will be billed to your client. So by all means, Arthur, fight this. My billing rate is $1,800 an hour. My associates are $950. Please, rack up the hours. We'll send you a bill." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Kenzo could almost hear Arthur Finch's bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. I will have to review the document and get back to you," Finch stammered. "You do that, Arthur," Sarah said, and hung up. Kenzo allowed himself a small, grim smile. The strike was not just a legal filing, it was a strategic demolition. He had not raised his voice. He had not engaged in a shouting match. He had simply allowed the logical consequences of their own actions and agreements to unfold. They had laughed at him, called him a technician lost in the weeds. Now the technician was taking apart their entire world, screw by methodical screw. The rest of the day was a cascade of aftershocks, each one a direct result of the morning's coordinated strike. The consequences began to cascade almost immediately, a series of dominoes falling in a perfectly straight line. Kenzo did not have to lift another finger. The mechanisms he had set in motion on Monday morning were working with brutal efficiency. The first domino was financial. Around 1:30 p.m. that Monday, Ellery, presumably after a hysterical and unproductive call with her father and their flustered lawyer, decided to engage in some retail therapy. It was a reflexive action for her. the go-to solution for any emotional distress. She went to her favorite store, Bergdorf Goodman on Fifth Avenue. She picked out a pair of Chanel slingbacks for $1,150 and a Dior saddlebag for $4,400. At the checkout counter, she handed the sales associate her black Amex card. The associate swiped it. A moment passed. The associate swiped it again. A small, troubled frown appeared on her face. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Kenzo," the associate said, her voice a low murmur of professional embarrassment. "The card has been declined." Ellery stared at her. "That's impossible. Run it again." "I have, ma'am. It says to call the card member services." A flush of hot, red humiliation crept up Ellery's neck. The people in line behind her were beginning to stare. She fumbled in her purse for another card, a Visa signature card also linked to Kenzo's accounts. She handed it over with a shaky hand. Declined. Her world, which had been built on the effortless transaction, had just ground to a screeching halt. She had to leave the items on the counter and walk out of the store, her face a mask of fury and shame. She had never been publicly denied anything in her adult life. The story, whispered from the sales associate to her manager to other clients, was all over the Upper East Side by cocktail hour. The narrative was not one of sympathy for Ellery, but of a shocking and sudden fall from grace. The second domino was legal. On Wednesday morning, Arthur Finch, having now thoroughly reviewed the prenup, filed a motion for emergency temporary support, arguing that Ellery was destitute and that the agreement was unconscionable. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass. Sarah Jenkins's team filed an immediate response. The response was a work of art. It included the signed prenup, the letter from Ellery's own previous lawyer advising her to sign it, and Kenzo's meticulously prepared spreadsheet of expenditures, detailing the $1.7 million he had spent on her non-essential lifestyle over 34 months. It showed that she was not a partner who had sacrificed her career for the marriage. She was a dependent who had never had a career to begin with. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had seen every trick in the book, took less than an hour to rule. She denied Finch's motion completely. Furthermore, she granted Sarah's motion to enforce the prenup, calling it a model of clarity and fairness. And then came the final, brutal blow. Citing the fee-shifting clause and the frivolous nature of Finch's motion, she ordered Ellery to pay Kenzo's legal fees for the motion, which amounted to $28,500 for Sarah's and her team's time. The irony was devastating. In trying to get money from Kenzo, Ellery now owed him a sum equivalent to a down payment on a small apartment. Prestige, who had promised to fund her legal battle, was suddenly faced with the first of many invoices. The third domino was shelter. A certified letter arrived at the UES apartment from the building's management company. It was a formal notice that the lease, which was solely in Kenzo's name and set to expire in 60 days, would not be renewed. Furthermore, Cismayos Richsand, as he was no longer residing there, Ellery was technically in violation of the lease terms as a non-leaseholding occupant. They gave her 30 days to vacate the premises. The $12,000 a month apartment, her glittering perch overlooking Madison Avenue, was no longer her home. It was a ticking time bomb. The reality began to sink in not just for Ellery, but for her parents. They would have to house her. Their own Park Avenue apartment, while large, was not configured for a long-term adult guest. Their finances, which they had always presented as vast and limitless, were about to be tested. Prestige's retirement portfolio was not designed to suddenly support his adult daughter's six-figure lifestyle indefinitely. The fourth domino was social. The world they inhabited was small and gossipy. Prestige had spent years cultivating an image of power and influence. He had told everyone who would listen that his son-in-law was a rising star at Cravath, a connection he was proud of. Now that connection was the source of his profound humiliation. The story that circulated was not the one Prestige tried to spin, of a villainous husband abandoning his loving wife. The story, pieced together from whispers from Bergdorf's, leaks from the courthouse, and the sheer undeniable speed of Kenzo's actions, was different. It was the story of Kenzo, the brilliant, hard-working lawyer, finally cutting ties with a family of freeloaders. It was the story of a man who had tolerated years of disrespect and then acted with the precision of a surgeon. In their world, success and strength were respected above all else. Kenzo's decisive action, paradoxically, elevated his status. Prestige and Ellery were now seen as what they were, people who had overplayed a weak hand and lost spectacularly. Invitations to charity galas began to dry up. Calls weren't returned. They were becoming social pariahs. Throughout all of this, Kenzo remained a ghost. He did not answer a single one of Ellery's hundreds of texts or voicemails, which devolved from anger to pleading to tearful apologies. "Kenzo, please, I made a mistake. I was stupid. I love you. Please just talk to me." "I didn't mean it, baby. It was a stupid joke. We can fix this." "How could you do this to me? To us? I'm nothing without you." The last message was perhaps the most honest thing she had ever said to him. He forwarded every message to Sarah Jenkins, who added them to a file labeled Post-Filing Communications. They were a record of her unraveling, and further proof that her only real objection to the divorce was the termination of her funding. He lived at his townhouse, the space now quiet and entirely his own. He had the locks changed, a $450 expense that brought him an immeasurable amount of peace. He worked, he went to the gym, he met his team at Cravath for meetings, his demeanor as calm and focused as ever. No one mentioned his personal life, but there was a new level of respect in their eyes. He had handled a personal crisis with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to a corporate merger. He had become a legend within the firm. He was not the man who had been replaced. He was the man who had cleaned house. 1 year later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Hudson River Park. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the same time of year his old life had fractured and his new one had begun. Kenzo ran along the waterfront path, his breathing steady, his stride powerful. He wore a simple pair of $150 Nike running shorts and a tech shirt, a stark contrast to the $7,000 suits that were his daily armor. Out here, he wasn't a partner at Cravath. He was just a man, his deep brown skin glistening with a healthy sweat, his mind clear and quiet. The past year had been one of profound change, a reconstruction built on the empty space his old life had occupied. The divorce had been finalized in under 6 months. Ellery and her father, faced with the mountain of legal fees they were accumulating, had been forced to capitulate. Arthur Finch had been fired, and a more pragmatic, less expensive lawyer had advised Ellery to accept the terms of the prenup without further contest. The consequences had been fully realized. Ellery had been forced to move out of the UES apartment. She now lived in a small one-bedroom rental in Murray Hill, an apartment that cost $3,800 a month, paid for by a dwindling trust from her grandparents. The white BMW X3 had been returned at the end of its lease. She now took the subway. She had been forced to get a job, her first ever, as a hostess at a trendy but mid-level restaurant in Soho, earning a salary that barely covered her rent. The Chanel bags and Dior dresses were sold off, one by one, on luxury consignment websites to pay for her lawyer and the court-ordered reimbursement to Kenzo. Prestige and Vivienne had been hit hard as well. Their social standing had plummeted. Their friends, the ones who had admired their perceived wealth and connections, had distanced themselves. The financial strain of supporting Ellery, even in a reduced capacity, had forced them to make changes. The Park Avenue apartment was quietly put on the market. They were downsizing, moving to a condo in Florida, a move they tried to spin as a planned retirement, but that everyone knew was a retreat. Kenzo took no pleasure in their downfall. He simply saw it as the natural outcome of a series of poor choices. His life, in contrast, had blossomed. He had been made a full equity partner at Cravath 6 months ahead of schedule. His colleagues said the way he handled his divorce was the most impressive piece of litigation they had ever seen, even if it never saw the inside of a courtroom. His income had nearly doubled, now approaching $1 million a year. But the real changes were internal. The West Village townhouse, once a battleground of taste and a symbol of his compromise, was now his sanctuary. He had redecorated, selling off the fussy, ornate furniture Ellery had insisted upon and replacing it with clean-lined, comfortable pieces that reflected his own taste. The walls were filled with the art he loved. The garden in the back was his passion project. He spent his Saturday mornings tending to the hydrangeas and Japanese maples, his hands in the soil. He had also taken on a new role at the firm: mentorship. He had specifically requested to be paired with a young black associate named David, a brilliant kid from the Bronx who reminded Kenzo of himself 20 years ago, hungry, smart, and a little intimidated by the rarefied air of Cravath. He took David under his wing, not just teaching him the law, but how to navigate the firm's complex culture. He taught him how to be twice as good, not with bitterness, but with pride. "Your work speaks for itself," Kenzo told him over lunch one day at a simple diner, a $15 burger in front of each of them. "But your character is what makes them remember you. Never let anyone devalue your contribution, ever." One crisp Saturday, as he was leaving a farmer's market in Union Square with a bag full of fresh produce, he saw her, Ellery. She was walking on the other side of the street, looking thin and tired. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was no longer a sheet of straightened glass. She wore it in its natural state, a halo of beautiful, tight coils that he had always loved but she had always tried to tame. She looked more herself than he had ever seen her. She saw him, and for a moment, she froze. Then, she crossed the street, her steps hesitant. "Kenzo," she said, her voice quiet. "Ellery," he replied, his tone neutral, not unkind. "You look good," she said. "I hear you made full partner. Congratulations." "Thank you." An awkward silence hung between them. "Listen," she said, looking down at her worn boots. I'm sorry for everything, for what I said, for how I was. I was a stupid, spoiled girl who didn't know anything about the real world." He looked at her, and for the first time he saw not an antagonist, but a person who had been taught a very hard lesson. He felt a flicker of pity, but not the kind that draws you back in. It was the detached pity one feels for a stranger's misfortune. Her apology was for her, not for him. He had found his own peace long ago. "I appreciate that, Ellery," he said, and he meant it. "I wish you well. I hope you find what you're looking for." He gave her a small, final nod and walked away, not looking back. He was heading home, to his garden, to a life he had built not on the price of things, but on their value. As he walked the final blocks to his townhouse, the sun warming his face, he thought about the nature of true wealth. He once thought it was the partnership, the townhouse, the number in his bank account. He now knew better. True wealth is the quiet dignity of self-respect. It's the peace of mind that comes from living an authentic life. It's the freedom of knowing your own worth, a worth that cannot be bought, sold, or replaced. It's the solid ground of character, a foundation that no insult, no betrayal, and no amount of laughter can ever shake. And that was a fortune he would never, ever lose. What do you think is the most important element of a true partnership? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the one that helps someone else find their own strength. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride.